The message arrived on Earth on a quiet Tuesday morning. It came not with fanfare or public announcement, but as a small ship that landed in a Nebraska cornfield, crushing several rows of crops in the process. Jack Peterson was tending to his tomatoes when he noticed the strange light in the sky. At 87 years old, his eyes weren't what they used to be, but some instincts never faded. He straightened his back slowly, one hand automatically reaching for a weapon that hadn't hung at his hip for decades. The ship was sleek and silver, nothing like the bulky human vessels he remembered from his service days. Jack watched calmly as it descended, setting his watering can down on the porch steps of his farmhouse. He didn't call anyone or run inside. Instead, he waited, feet planted firmly on the soil he'd worked for the past 30 years. When the alien emerged, Jack wasn't surprised. Humanity had sealed its borders after the Unification Wars, but everyone knew what was out there. This one was Salaxian by the look of it, blue-skinned, four-armed, with those characteristic ridges along the skull. It wore the formal diplomatic colors of the Galactic Council. "Commander Peterson," the alien called out, voice translator giving its words a metallic edge. "Just Jack now," he replied, not moving from his spot. "Haven't been commander for a long time." The alien approached cautiously, stopping at a respectful distance. "I am Envoy Zex Toll of the Galactic Council. I apologize for the intrusion, but our situation is desperate." Jack nodded toward the house. "Come inside, then." No sense standing in the sun. His living room was simple and neat. Photographs lined the walls. Jack with his squad during the wars. Jack with his late wife. Jack with the children from the local school where he sometimes taught history. The alien's eyes lingered on one photo in particular, a younger Jack standing amidst the ruins of what had once been Paris. "They told me you wouldn't see me," the envoy said, "that all human veterans refused contact with the council." Jack poured 2 glasses of water, offering one to his visitor. "Most do. I'm just curious by nature." The alien placed a small device on the coffee table. It projected a hologram showing star systems and fleet movements. Red markers spread like a virus across the outer colonies. "The Craxians," Zex Toll explained. "They emerged from uncharted space 6 months ago. At first, we thought they were simply another species seeking recognition. Then the attacks began." Jack watched silently as the hologram showed alien ships being torn apart, colonies falling, refugee ships fleeing. The tactics were familiar: strike hard at military targets, then civilian infrastructure, create panic, exploit the chaos. "We've lost 16 systems already," the envoy continued. "Our forces are overwhelmed. The Craxians don't respond to diplomacy, and their technology is unlike anything we've encountered." Jack took a sip of water. "Why come to me?" "Earth has been isolated for 300 years. Our military is defensive only." "Because the Craxians fight like..." The alien hesitated. "Like humans used to," Jack finished for him. "Yes, and our forces don't know how to counter such aggression." Jack stood and walked to the window. His garden stretched out before him, orderly rows of vegetables and flowers that had taken years of patient work. Beyond it, the fields of his neighbors, the small town in the distance where he bought supplies and occasionally shared drinks with other old-timers. "The council wants military advisors," Zex Toll said. "Veterans of your Unification Wars who understand this kind of conflict. We're willing to offer." "I don't need payment," Jack interrupted. He turned back to face the alien, his weathered face serious. "But I won't be just an advisor. I don't understand. If I help, I fight, and I choose my own team." The alien looked shocked. "But you're old." Jack smiled slightly. "Yes, we all are now. The youngest veterans are in their 70s. Does that bother the council? They expected consultants, not combatants." Jack looked back at the hologram, at the red spread of destruction. "Those colonies that fell, were there children there?" "Yes," the alien answered quietly. Jack nodded once, decision made. I'll need to make some calls. Old friends. You might want to wait outside. Some of them won't be happy to see a council representative." As the alien stepped out, Jack reached for an old metal box on the top shelf of his closet. Inside was a communicator he hadn't used in 30 years and a list of names and locations. His hands didn't shake as he powered it up. "Nancy," he said when the first call connected. "It's Jack. How do you feel about saving the galaxy?" Nancy Williams wiped flour from her hands as the bakery door chimed. The morning rush was over, and she had started preparing dough for tomorrow's bread. At 82 years old, she still insisted on doing most of the work herself, despite her granddaughter's protests. "We're closed until," she began, then stopped when she saw who had entered. "Jack Peterson. I thought you were dead." Jack smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Not yet, though not for lack of trying." Nancy studied her old commander. His hair had gone completely white, and he walked with a slight limp, but the eyes were the same. Clear, focused, missing nothing. She hadn't seen him in person since the memorial service for Bill, almost 20 years ago. "This isn't a social call," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." Jack nodded toward the back room. "Got somewhere private we can talk." In the small office behind the kitchen, Jack explained the situation while Nancy listened silently. When he finished, she opened a drawer and pulled out a small glass and a bottle of whiskey. "Drink?" she offered. Jack shook his head, gave it up. Nancy poured herself a shot. "Smart man. I should have done the same." She downed the whiskey in one swallow. "You really think a bunch of old soldiers can make a difference against these Craxians? I think we know things the Council forces don't. Things that can't be taught in simulations or training exercises." Nancy glanced at the photos on her office wall. Her bakery. Her family. The life she'd built after the wars. "I haven't fired a rifle in 30 years, Jack. You were the best sniper in the Sol system. That kind of skill doesn't just disappear." Nancy rubbed her artificial hip. "The body around it does." Jack waited patiently. He knew better than to push. Finally, Nancy sighed. "Who else have you contacted?" "You're the first. Thought I'd try Frank next. Then Alan and Susan. Frank's teaching now, isn't he? Some university." Jack nodded. "Community college. Physics." Nancy closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had changed. The baker was gone, and the soldier had returned. "When do we leave?" 3 days later, they stood in Frank Garcia's classroom after his students had filed out. He was explaining a complex equation on the board, so engrossed that he hadn't noticed their entrance. "Still talking to yourself, Frank?" Nancy called out. Frank turned, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Well, I'll be damned." He set down his marker and embraced his old friends. "What brings you two here?" "Some kind of reunion." "Something like that," Jack said. As they explained, Frank's expression grew more serious. He ran a hand over his gray beard, listening intently. "These Craxians," he said when they finished. "They sound like bad news." "They are," Jack confirmed. "Worse than anything we faced." Frank looked around his classroom, at the neat rows of desks, the inspirational posters, the half-finished experiments at the back. "My students have finals next week," he said. Nancy raised an eyebrow. "The galaxy might not be here next month." Frank laughed. "Always the optimist, Nancy." He picked up his phone. "Let me call the department chair. I'll need someone to cover my classes." By the end of the week, they had gathered at Alan Kim's chess club in Seattle. The tactical expert had aged better than the rest of them, his movements still precise and deliberate as he demonstrated a complex endgame to his students. "Checkmate in 3 moves," he told the young player sitting across from him. Then he noticed Jack, Nancy, and Frank waiting by the door. "Ah, it seems I have visitors. We'll continue this lesson next week." After the club emptied, Susan Powell joined them, arriving last from her conservation center in Arizona. Her white hair was pulled back in a practical braid, her hands calloused from years of working with soil and plants. The five of them sat around a chess table, old soldiers planning one more mission. "The council has arranged transport," Jack explained. "We leave tomorrow from the old Nevada base." "What about equipment?" Ellen asked. "Our old gear is in museums now. They've provided everything we might need. Latest tech." Susan's eyes narrowed. "Do they understand what they're asking of us? What it means to bring human warfare back to the stars?" Jack met her gaze steadily. "I don't think they do, but they will." Frank raised an imaginary glass. "To the old squad. One last fight." "One last fight," they echoed. The human transport ship emerged from jump space near Proxima Delta, a small moon that served as the forward base for the Galactic Council forces. Jack and his team stood on the observation deck, watching as the alien landscape came into view. "Doesn't look like much," Nancy said, adjusting her uniform. The Council had provided them with standard-issue combat gear, which they had promptly modified based on personal preference. Nancy had already adjusted the scope on her rifle 3 times. "It's not the ground that matters," Ellen replied. "It's the position. This moon controls access to 3 major trade routes." The ship docked with a gentle bump. As the doors opened, they were met by a delegation of council officials. At the front stood a tall, insect-like alien with gleaming carapace armor and multiple eyes that blinked in sequence. "I am General Thrixval, commander of the Council Defense Force," it said through a translator. "We are honored by your presence." The hesitation wasn't lost on Jack. He stepped forward, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Commander Jack Peterson, my team is ready to assist with planning and strategy." General Thrixval's eyes blinked rapidly. "Yes, about that. We were expecting advisors, not combat personnel." Susan stepped forward. "We are both." The general's attention shifted to the rest of the team. "But you are." It struggled to find a diplomatic word. "Old." Frank supplied with a smile. "Yes, we are." "Is that a problem?" Before the general could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. A young council officer rushed forward, chittering urgently to Thrixval in their native language. "What's happening?" Jack asked. "Craxian scouts," the general replied. "They've breached our outer sensor net. The first wave could reach this position within hours." Jack exchanged glances with his team. "Then we should get to work." The command center was a buzz of activity. Aliens of various species monitored screens and communicated in a mix of languages. Jack's team stood out not just as the only humans, but as the oldest beings present. A holographic map showed the moon and surrounding space. Red dots indicated the approaching Craxian forces, far more numerous than the blue markers representing council defenders. "Your troops?" Alan asked, studying the display. "What's their combat experience?" A reptilian officer answered. "Most have completed the standard 3 cycles of training at the academy." "Simulations," Susan said. "No actual combat." "The council has been at peace for generations," Thrixval explained, "until the Craxians arrived." Frank walked around the display, examining the defensive positions. "These shield generators are placed too far apart, and your artillery units are too exposed. Our tactical simulations indicate," the reptilian officer began. "Forget your simulations," Nancy interrupted. "They won't help you against an enemy that doesn't play by your rules." Jack placed his hands on the edge of the holotable. "Here's what we're going to do. Frank, I want you to reconfigure those shield generators. Nancy, find high ground with good sight lines. Susan, set up a field medical station here, away from obvious targets. Alan, work with their officers on repositioning their forces." The council members looked to General Thrixval, who seemed unsure. "With all respect, Commander," Thrixval said, "perhaps you should observe our standard procedures before." The lights flickered as a distant explosion shook the base. "They're here," Jack said calmly. "General, you can follow our advice, or you can continue with the tactics that have lost you 16 systems. Your choice. After a moment of silence, Thrixval nodded. Proceed. As the human veterans moved with purpose, the younger council officers watched in confusion. Jack checked his weapon, an old-style plasma rifle he had insisted on instead of the newer models. Remember, he told his team as they prepared to take their positions, we're not here to win medals. We're here to keep as many of these kids alive as possible. Nancy adjusted her scope one final time. Just like old times. Jack shook his head. No, back then, we fought because we had to. Now we fight so they don't have to become what we became. Outside, the sky lit up with the first barrage of Craxian weapons fire. The old soldiers stepped onto the battlefield, and the Galactic Council watched in shock as they moved not toward safety, but toward the coming storm. The first wave of Craxian soldiers burst through the tree line at the edge of the Council's perimeter. They moved fast, six-limbed bodies low to the ground, armor gleaming in the pale light of Proxima Delta's sun. Their weapons fired continuously, spraying energy bolts across the defensive line. In the command center, General Thrixval and the council representatives watched through camera feeds. The young council soldiers were already falling back, their neat formations breaking under the assault. They're retreating, one of the council members said, mandibles clicking in distress. The eastern sector will be overrun in minutes. Wait, General Thrixval said, pointing to another screen. Look at the humans. The camera showed Jack's team, still in position. Nancy knelt on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, her rifle steady despite her artificial hip. Frank had set up a series of small devices along the most likely approach routes. Susan had established a medical station behind a natural rock formation, already treating the first wounded aliens who made it back. Alan stood with a group of council officers, calmly redirecting forces to shore up weak points, and Jack walked the line, moving from soldier to soldier, his presence somehow steadying the panicked youngsters. They're not running, the general observed. As the Craxians charged toward the human position, Nancy took a deep breath and fired. The lead Craxian dropped, a clean shot through what passed for its head. She fired again, and another fell. Again and again, with mechanical precision, each shot finding its target. The Craxian advance faltered for just a moment. That was when Frank triggered his devices. They weren't explosives, as the council had expected, but electromagnetic pulse generators. The Craxian weapons stuttered and died, forcing the aliens to pause and reset their systems. Now, Jack's voice carried across the battlefield. The council soldiers who had held position opened fire, catching the Craxians in the open. In the command center, a sense of hope began to replace the earlier despair. How did they know? A council officer asked. The Craxian weapons use a cyclic power system that's vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses, but that information wasn't in the briefing materials. They didn't know, General Thrixval said quietly. They tested different countermeasures during the first few minutes of combat. I watched the old human with the beard, Frank, try 3 different frequencies before finding the one that worked. On another screen, they could see Jack leading a small counterattack to rescue a trapped group of council soldiers. Despite his age, he moved with purpose and precision. There was no wasted motion, no heroic charges or dramatic gestures, just the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Look at how they fight, one of the council members observed. No emotion, no fear, no anger. No glory, another added. They fight like they're gardening or cleaning, like it's just a job to be done. Susan's medical station had filled with wounded. Unlike the council medics who worked in a frenzy, she moved methodically, triaging patients with a glance, directing her assistants with simple hand signals. When a wounded Craxian was brought in, she treated it with the same care as the council soldiers. Why is she helping the enemy? A council officer asked. Because she's a doctor first, soldier second, General Thrixval guessed. As the first wave of Craxians was pushed back, Alan coordinated the repositioning of forces, anticipating where the next attack would come. Nancy had moved to a new vantage point, still picking off targets with unerring accuracy. The council war room watched in silence as the tide of battle shifted. What had seemed like a certain defeat was becoming, if not a victory, at least not a rout. "I don't understand," one of the junior officers said. "They're so old. Their reflexes should be slower, their bodies weaker, yet they fight better than our best troops." General Thrixval's multiple eyes blinked thoughtfully. "I think it's because they've seen enough war to know how to fight without letting it consume them. Our soldiers either freeze in panic or lose themselves in bloodlust. These humans, they just work." On the screen, Jack stood among the council soldiers, pointing out defensive positions, his weathered face calm despite the chaos around him. For a moment, he looked directly at the camera, as if he could see through it to the council members watching. They fight like this, General Thrixval realized, because they've learned there's no other way to survive. The council war room fell silent as Jack entered. His uniform was dirty and torn at one sleeve. A small cut above his eye had stopped bleeding but remained uncleaned. He carried himself with the same steady calm he had shown on the battlefield. "Commander Peterson," General Thrixval greeted him. "Your team's performance was unexpected." Jack nodded slightly. "The Craxians will be back. That was just a probe of our defenses." He stepped to the holographic display and waved his hand through it, adjusting the view to show the broader terrain. The council officers watched, unsure what to make of this old human who had just helped them repel an attack that should have overwhelmed their position. "They'll hit us from 3 directions next time," Jack said, pointing to specific approaches. "Here, here, and here. They'll expect us to concentrate our forces at the main defense line." A council tactician clicked her mandibles nervously. "Our simulations suggest they will attack from the north, where our defenses are weakest." "They're not following your simulations," Jack said simply. "They're following a doctrine of pressure and exploitation. We've seen it before. In your unification wars," General Thrixval said. Jack looked up sharply. "You've studied our history." "Some of us have," the general admitted, "though most council records of Earth's conflicts are sealed. Too disturbing for public access." The door opened and the rest of Jack's team entered. Nancy was cleaning her rifle. Frank carried a tablet with new calculations. Susan's medical uniform was stained with various colors of blood, and Alan brought a stack of reports. "We lost 23 soldiers in that first wave," Susan reported. 17 more wounded but stable. 3 critical. "And we've got about 4 hours before the next attack," Alan added, spreading out a hand-drawn map on the table. "They're regrouping here, behind this ridge." The council officers looked at the crude paper map with confusion. Their entire system was digital, holographic, integrated with real-time data. "Why are you using paper?" one asked. Frank smiled. "Can't be hacked, can't be jammed, doesn't rely on power systems." Jack pointed to Alan's map. "The Craxians will try to draw our forces here, then hit us from behind. We need to reorganize our defenses." "With what?" General Thrixval asked. "We've already committed all available troops." "Not troops," Jack said. "Tactics. The Craxians fight like we used to, with overwhelming force and aggression. But they have the same weakness we had." "Which is?" a council member asked. "They expect the enemy to either match their brutality or break under it," Nancy explained, looking up from her rifle. "They don't expect patience." Jack outlined his plan, pointing to key positions on the map. The council officers listened with growing discomfort. "But that would mean sacrificing the forward outpost," one objected. "It's already lost," Jack said flatly. "Better to use it as bait than lose the soldiers defending it for nothing." "That's cold," the council officer said. Susan set down her medical kit. "War is cold. The trick is to stay warm anyway." As the council members debated the ethics of Jack's strategy, Frank worked with their engineers, teaching them how to modify standard equipment for new purposes. Nancy took a group of young council snipers aside, showing them techniques developed during Earth's bloodiest conflicts. "Your weapons are better than anything we had," she told them. "But a gun is only as good as the mind behind it. You need to think like your target. Anticipate." In the medical bay, Susan shared emergency field procedures with the council doctors. "When you can't save everyone, you need a system to decide," she explained gently to their chief medical officer, who had never faced mass casualties before. Alan gathered intelligence officers, teaching them to look for patterns in seemingly random Craxian movements. "They want you to see chaos," he explained. "That's how they hide their true intentions." As night fell on Proxima Delta, the mood in the base had changed. The initial shock of the Craxian attack had given way to something else. Not confidence exactly, but purpose. In his temporary quarters, Jack studied the star charts, learning the names of worlds he had never seen. Worlds now threatened by the same violence that had nearly destroyed his own planet centuries ago. "We'll hold this position," he told General Thrixval when the alien commander came to check on him. "But eventually, you'll need to understand why they fight, not just how to stop them." "And you know?" Thrixval asked. Jack looked up, his eyes reflecting the starlight from the small window. "We might. We've been where they are now." The main Craxian force arrived 3 hours earlier than expected. Their ships darkened the sky above Proxima Delta, and the ground shook as their heavy assault vehicles landed beyond the horizon. In the command center, alarms blared as sensor readings went off the scale. The council officers moved in panic, issuing contradictory orders and preparing for immediate evacuation. "We should retreat to the secondary base," one of the senior council commanders insisted. "There are too many of them." Jack watched the displays calmly, his weathered hand steady as he adjusted the tactical map. "No, this is where we hold them." "But Commander, our forces are outnumbered 10-1. "Numbers aren't everything," Jack said. He turned to his team, who stood ready despite the chaos around them. "Everyone remember the plan?" They nodded. Their faces showed no fear, only focus. "Then let's get to work." As the Craxian forces advanced across the plains toward the base, they encountered minimal resistance. The forward outposts that Jack had deliberately undermanned fell quickly, giving the Craxians a false sense of easy victory. Nancy had positioned herself and her trainees on the cliffs overlooking the main approach. Instead of targeting the Craxian soldiers, she directed them to aim at the command units at the rear. "Always target leadership first," she told her students. "Soldiers without direction become just a crowd." Frank had prepared a surprise for the Craxian vehicles. Rather than placing explosives in obvious defensive positions, he had buried them in seemingly safe pathways. When the Craxians avoided the visible defenses, they triggered his traps instead. The council war room watched through surveillance feeds as the carefully laid plan unfolded. The Craxians had expected to overwhelm the defenders with superior numbers and firepower. Instead, they found themselves channeled into killing zones where their numbers worked against them. "This is," one of the council members began. "Efficient," General Thrixval finished. "No wasted effort. No heroics." On the eastern flank, a group of council soldiers became trapped when Craxian dropships landed behind their position. They called desperately for evacuation, but there were no ships available. "They're cut off," a communications officer reported. "We can't reach them." Alan studied the map for just a moment. "There's a way." He turned to Jack. "I'll need 5 volunteers." Jack nodded. "Go." Despite his age, Alan moved quickly, gathering a small team of council soldiers who had shown the most aptitude for his lessons. Together, they slipped through a maintenance tunnel that the Craxians had overlooked. The council officers watched in amazement as the small team outflanked the Craxian position, causing confusion in their ranks. The trapped soldiers seized the opportunity to break through the enemy lines. "How did he know that tunnel would be clear?" a council tactician asked. "He didn't," Jack replied. "But he knew the Craxians would focus on obvious threats, not hidden ones. When the Craxians deployed chemical weapons against the civilian shelters, Susan was ready. She had anticipated this move and prepared countermeasures that saved thousands of lives. You expected them to target civilians? A council doctor asked her, horrified. Susan's eyes were sad, but her hands remained steady as she distributed antidotes. When you're losing, you try to change the rules of the game. The turning point came when a Craxian commander sent a message requesting parley. The council was eager to accept, hoping for a diplomatic solution. It's a trap, Jack said immediately. The council representatives were skeptical. How can you be sure? Because that's exactly what I would have done in their position, Jack explained. They're not interested in talking. They want us to lower our defenses. Instead of accepting the parley, Jack sent a message of his own, appearing to agree but suggesting a different meeting location. When the Craxian forces moved to ambush what they thought would be a delegation, they found themselves caught in a trap of Jack's making. The Craxian leadership was captured, throwing their forces into disarray. What had seemed like an inevitable defeat for the Council was transformed into an unexpected victory. In the aftermath, as Council soldiers secured the battlefield, General Thrixval approached Jack. Your tactics were unconventional, but effective. Jack watched as Susan tended to wounded from both sides. This isn't a victory yet. It's just a reprieve. But how did you anticipate their every move? Jack's eyes reflected memories of battles long past. Because humans invented most of them. We've had a long history of finding new ways to kill each other. Victory came at a cost. As dawn broke over Proxima Delta, the battlefield fell silent. The Craxian forces had retreated to their ships, leaving behind their dead and wounded. The Council forces had held their ground, but the base was damaged, the defenses in ruins. In the field hospital, Susan worked without rest. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she treated Council soldiers, civilians, and even Craxian prisoners. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes carried a weight that the younger Council doctors noticed. How do you do this? A young medic asked her. How do you keep going? Susan finished bandaging a wounded Craxian before answering. You focus on who you can save, not who you've lost. Frank was in worse shape. During the battle, he had rushed to protect a group of civilian refugees when a Craxian bomber targeted their shelter. The explosion had thrown him against a wall, breaking 3 ribs and leaving a deep gash across his back. He lay on a hospital bed, insisting he was fine even as Susan gave him stern orders to rest. I've had worse, he told her with a weak smile. We all have, Susan replied, checking his bandages. That's not the point. Nancy returned from the perimeter, her rifle slung over her shoulder. She moved stiffly, her artificial hip clearly causing her pain after 20 hours in position. But she had lost none of her precision. The final count showed 78 confirmed kills, each a clean shot that had saved Council lives. Any sign of them returning? Jack asked as she entered the command center. Nancy shook her head. They're regrouping, probably waiting for reinforcements. Ellen was working with the intelligence team, analyzing data captured from the Craxian command ship. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his mind remained sharp. They've called for backup from their home fleet, he reported. We have maybe 3 days before they return in force. The Council celebration of their victory faded quickly as the reality of their situation became clear. They had won a battle, not the war. The Craxians would return, stronger and wiser. As evening approached, the human veterans gathered in a quiet corner of the base. They sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Jack produced a small flask and 5 metal cups. I thought you gave it up, Nancy said as he poured a small amount of amber liquid into each cup. I did, Jack replied. This is for them. He set 2 additional cups aside, pouring drinks that would remain untouched. The humans understood without explanation. These were for the comrades they had lost in wars long past. To Kelly, Jack said quietly, raising his cup. To Richard, Nancy added. To Pavel, from Alan. To Maria, Susan said. To Bill, Frank finished. They drank in silence, a ritual they had performed many times before. The council members watched from a distance, not understanding but sensing the importance of the moment. General Thrixval approached only after the humans had finished their ceremony. Commander Peterson, the council wishes to honor your team for your service today. Jack looked up. Save your honors for those who didn't make it. The general's eyes blinked in sequence. We lost 27 soldiers and 9 civilians in the attack. Each one had a name, Jack said. Each one had a life. Remember them as people, not numbers. Thrixval was silent for a moment. This is how humans honor their fallen. One of the ways, Susan said. There are many. A young council officer approached, carrying a data pad. Sir, we've received word from Central Command. They're sending reinforcements, but they won't arrive for at least 5 days. Too late, Alan observed. What do we do? The officer asked, mandibles trembling slightly. Jack looked at his team. Despite their injuries and exhaustion, he saw the same determination in their eyes that he had seen centuries ago on battlefields across Earth. We hold this position, he said simply, and we teach you how to hold it after we're gone. You're leaving? General Thrixval asked in alarm. Frank adjusted his bandages, wincing slightly. Eventually, this isn't our war. It's yours. Our job is to make sure you survive long enough to fight it your way. But we need you, the young officer said. Nancy's weathered face softened slightly. No, you need what we know. There's a difference. 3 days later, the Galactic Council held an emergency session in their grand chamber on the capital world. The massive room was filled with representatives from 100 different species, all focused on the holographic display showing Proxima Delta. The Craxian reinforcements had arrived as predicted, but they had found a different battlefield than they expected. The human veterans had transformed the moon's defenses, using every hour to prepare for the coming attack. The humans call it a defense in depth, a council military advisor explained. Instead of a single strong line, they created layers of resistance. The council watched as the Craxian forces encountered one carefully planned obstacle after another. Hidden mines, false targets, decoy communications. The tricks were simple but effective. Are they winning? Asked one of the council elders. Not exactly, the military advisor replied. They're buying time. The humans knew they couldn't defeat the entire Craxian fleet with the forces available. So they designed a defense that would inflict maximum damage while preserving our troops. On the screen, they could see Jack directing the defense from a forward position. Despite days without proper rest, he remained focused, his voice steady as he issued orders. Nancy and her trainees continued to target Craxian officers with deadly precision. Frank, still bandaged, had rigged the base's power systems to create electromagnetic pulses that disrupted Craxian communications. Susan had expanded her medical operation, teaching council doctors techniques developed during Earth's bloodiest conflicts. Ellen had predicted the Craxian attack patterns so accurately that council forces were always one step ahead. We need to decide, the council chairperson said, whether to offer humanity a formal alliance. A murmur ran through the chamber. For centuries, the Council had kept Earth at arm's length, fearful of humanity's violent history. They've saved one of our worlds, an advocate for alliance argued. They've shown they can be trusted. Have they? Countered another representative. Or have they simply demonstrated why we feared them in the first place? Their capacity for warfare is disturbing. The debate continued until a message arrived from General Thrixval. The Craxians had requested parley, real parley this time. Their fleet was withdrawing from Proxima Delta. The humans did it, the general reported. They didn't just defeat the Craxians. They convinced them that continued aggression would be too costly. The council chamber fell silent, processing this unexpected development. The human commander wishes to address you, General Thrixval added. After a moment's hesitation, the chairperson nodded. The holographic display shifted to show Jack Peterson, standing in the damaged command center of the Proxima Delta base. Members of the Galactic Council, Jack began, his voice tired but firm. You asked for our help, and we gave it. Now I have something to ask of you. He paused, looking at his team gathered around him. They were battered and exhausted, but there was a quiet pride in their stance. Don't make the same mistakes we did. Earth spent thousands of years fighting itself before we finally learned better. We nearly destroyed ourselves in the process. Jack's weathered face showed the weight of memories that stretched back to humanity's darkest hours. The Craxians aren't monsters. They're doing what they think they must to survive. Find out why. Solve the real problem, not just the symptom. The council chairperson leaned forward. And what will humanity do now? Will you rejoin galactic society? Share your knowledge of warfare? Jack shook his head. We're going home. Our war days are behind us. But we still have much to learn from you, the chairperson protested. No, Jack said gently. You have much to learn from yourselves. We just helped you remember that peace is worth fighting for, but it's also worth talking for. As the human transport prepared to depart, the council forces on Proxima Delta gathered to say goodbye. The young soldiers who had trained under the veterans stood straighter now, their eyes more focused. General Thrixval presented Jack with a small crystal containing a recording of the battle. So that others may learn, the general said. Jack accepted it with a nod. So that others won't have to. As their ship lifted off, Nancy looked back at the scared landscape of Proxima Delta. Think they'll be all right. They'll find their own way, Jack replied, just like we did. The old soldiers watched as the stars welcomed them home, leaving behind not just tactics and strategies, but the harder lessons that only experience could teach, that the greatest victory is finding a way to end the fighting.